G'day, good evening from Tassie. Oops. Am I coming through okay, everyone? G'day, mate. How's it going? Any questions? Oh, since nobody's asking any questions yet, yeah, we've sort of come back, and now a couple of videos here and there, just to touch on some controversial sort of subject matters that people keep on talking about, but I thought, well, maybe it's a bit of time to basically deal with some of these things, you know. So yes, necessities. Oh, Steve's there as well. G'day, Steve. And Richard. G'day, Stephen. Harry, do you eat less eggs in winter as hens can't be on the pasture much, or probably get fed more grains and stuff? In Tasmania, we don't really have that problem. It's like New Zealand. We're pretty green. It's like the British Isles, very green. People confuse Tasmania. Tasmania's sort of environment is closer to New Zealand than to the rest of Australia. Australia in the middle has a large desert and tends to have a very different climate compared to Tasmania and New Zealand. New Zealand and Tasmania are both island sort of states in a sense, and the conditions are very different. So here we've got a lot of green, thick soils, so we don't have those sort of problems. And only on the east coast, where there's a bit of salinity issues and stuff like that, there tends to be the grasses there tend to be these really greeny, hardy sort of grasses, and they tend to have sheep for that. So the whole east coast is full of sheep. It's a bit like that, where cattle will be up north, and some of the agriculture is going to be up north. Central Highlands, again, very rocky. Sheep, again, it's like Scotland, very rocky in the sort of the northern parts, and it has that sort of environment. So yeah, Tasmania is very different from the rest. So we have Tassie eggs all year round. I can get pastured eggs right now, available. So non-issue. The IGA stores have, I think, 4 different varieties nowadays. They used to have only one out of Burnie. Now they've got 4. They stopped putting the Burnie ones. I don't know why, but no idea. Maybe they couldn't get enough, so they changed suppliers. It is what it is. Mate, how are you, Steve? Is this really live? Yes, in the flesh. Yeah, I have done another one, but that was back in August. It was a while ago, so it has been a while in between things, and I was forced to do it today because I've got a couple of things I have to do for Dad on Sunday, and tomorrow I'm socialising with friends. So trying to manage my work, the weekends, it's just. And I had plenty of time because I'd been working quite a few overtime hours. I'd accumulated quite a bit of time, enough to take 2 days off. So I've taken today off as 1 day. By the end of the month, I'll probably have to take another day off, and I'll still have more than a day off available, which I can carry over about 10 hours. I can't carry over any more than that, so it's limited. So you've got to take it when you get it. So yeah, so I said to myself, okay, I'll use it as a live stream day. So that's what happened. It's not as weekends are probably better for a lot of people, but the problem is with me, weekends, there's a lot of other commitments that I have as well. So that's a difficulty. So I have to use some of my flex time to take a day off and use that to do a live stream. So that's what I'm doing currently. So it'll be weekends in some regards, in some cases when I've got more time. When I don't, it'll be weekdays. So it'll sort of fluctuate all over the place. That's why I sort of changed, and I realized that the site doesn't seem to calculate properly the destinations or the time zones. So I have to basically relook at that and see whether I can find another site that does that, or otherwise I'll have to put all the time slots in the description again, like I used to. So I was trying to get away from that, change it a bit, so people would just click on in the description, force them to go into the description as well to, see other things that are there, my other channels like on X and stuff like that. So yeah, but it's sort of that part that I wanted failed, so I stuffed it up. Anyway, shit happens. I hope you're well as well. Richard, how are you, mate? I haven't actually dropped on any of the Zooms. I need to, when I get a chance. I've just been busy with Dad and other things and that have taken a lot of my time currently. So I've nearly got Dad on a package where I can get some support for him, some additional support. That will obviously free some of my time up as well. But also, it means that he's got more support in that regard. So, yeah, anyway. It's going through the motions. It's bloody takes so damn long. Processes just like they don't want you to get anything. It's just really, the system's probably choked. It's too much demand on it. And yeah, it's just, you have to keep on battling with them to try and get anything. Anyway. What do you think about raw meat for carnivores? Some say it's better than cooked. I sort of disagree. What cooked meat allows you to do, one is to eat more meat, so you can get more amino acids than you would from raw meat. It's much harder to eat to get the higher levels of protein compared to cooked meat. Cooked meat is easier. It's when you cooking already breaks down a lot of the proteins, and then you chew, it breaks it down further, and then by the time it hits the stomach, you're going to extract more amino acids because it's already, there's some pre-digestion. It's broken down further, and then you can actually go from much quicker from denaturing the proteins to completely breaking them down into simple amino acids. So your amino acid pool will go up. So it's more beneficial in terms of you trying to get more. And it's the reason why humans were able to expand and grow in bigger numbers. It's because they were able to get more nutrition into themselves, into their children, and grow bigger tribes and groups of people. Otherwise, that wouldn't be possible if you were just doing raw. You can actually see it even with the cats. Their numbers tend to increase slowly, and when they're under pressure, they can collapse very quickly. It's the reason why some of them have gone extinct as well. So it's a survival strategy in that regard. Now, if somebody's come off a veganurized diet, or they've come off a sad diet which has got a lot of plants in it, or a vegetarian diet that had a number of deficiencies, those sort of people may not be generating sufficient stomach acidity. They may have also overgrowth of pathogens, and all that can actually make it much more difficult to, consume or to work with cooked meat, where it seems it's the meat that comes from, you're actually getting some additional taurine. That's probably helping the proton pumps, where you have to then synthesize it to get that back, in a sense, through the other pathways. So that gives you that sort of advantage. And it just seems like if you look at all the animals that eat raw meat, their pH slightly tends to be higher, where meat that's actually broken down, that's actually more broken, more denatured, in a sense, that what cooking does, that high denatured cooking product, or vultures that have got a 1.5 as well, most of that food is sort of more denatured because it's rotted, and that food is much easier to be consumed with it seems to work much better with that lower pH, where with that sort of a slightly high pH in the 2s and 2.5s and all that, it seems it's raw meat is more tolerable in that regard. Obviously, you won't absorb as much amino acids, but at the same time, it seems to be a bit more comfortable for people that can't generate enough acidity and stuff like that. So there seems to be that sort of mix, and it seems that extra taurine that they're getting, maybe that's helping the proton pumps to assist them in breaking down, especially if people have got overgrowth and other issues of that sort. And it's usually very much those people that have gone from a raw food diet, a vegan diet, tend to gravitate to raw meat because it seems to be much more comfortable. But that just tells me that they have derangements in the functioning of their stomach. So it's more to do with that rather than sort of the nonsense that we hear from a lot of people saying that it's something special. No, it's not. And you're not a cat, okay, that can hardly produce any. Even cats can produce very small, tiny amounts of taurine, but the Pottinger's cat issue, that's what it is. You have to eat more raw and fresh to get it, or have it supplemented in the food, which is what food industry does. And that's how they get away with that issue. But yeah. So that's my personal opinion. Humans have been doing cooking for a very, very long time, and it hasn't been an issue. How come in the modern era some people claim it's an issue? Well, because they have crackpot ideas and opinions, and they have N of 1 experiences, as I pointed earlier, and they think because of that is much better. Well, if they fix eventually their bodies and guts and all that, they will be able to tolerate things more cooked and stuff like that, because they'll have a better functioning stomach that can actually clear also a lot of the byproducts of cooking. So poor functioning stomach can't do that as well. So yeah, it's more nuanced in that regard. Anyway, Steve, why do we ignore what cholesterol itself regulates its own production, and insulin glucagon does too? Why do we ignore? Brainwashing, ideology. It's really fundamentally what it is. And you forgot to put the Q in front. Remember, we have to put the Q. Yeah, so I've picked up that pedantic behavior from that bald man across the pond, the professor. You know that guy, the professor that's controlled by that little teddy bear, that bloke. So I've picked up Bart's habit of putting Q's in front of questions. Look, the thing is, it's an ideology that's grown out of, how a waxy alcohol type material can be demonized, which the body produces and is so essential for, cell membranes and a lot of structures within the body. How it ever got demonized is just the crazy reality of our world. Next will be basically pelting and demonizing poor old firemen for turning up at a fire. They are very highly associated with fires. It must be them that are at fault for these fires. It's not the fires being lit or by others, or by other factors, or by things like what are they called, like lightning and stuff like that. No, it's not that. Definitely not. It's the fireman. It's that pesky fireman that turns up and damn is destroying these forests. And it's, that pesky LP-little-a and that pesky cholesterol that's turning up and helping the immune system. How dare it help the immune system heal the body? It's just crazy that we can overturn. You ask a doctor, does LDLC, is it involved in the immune function? Let's say a physiologist, they'll say yes. And then they'll demonize LDL because it's ideology. This is the reductionist way of thinking, and we've associated it. It's become part of the cultural mindset, and it's really hard to fight against a lie that is so believed. It's like the old saying that a lie can actually go around the earth. I can't remember how many times, 2 times or 3 times or whatever, before the truth even gets out of bed. And there's your problem, that, we are, as I said in my earlier live stream, we are designed for that fight or flight. This is why fear works. Fear works in mass media to push narratives, to push belief systems, to push politics. It's fear, because fear works on our fundamental sort of, that fight or flight fundamental part of our being, our psychology. And they work on that. And it's the same thing with cholesterol. It's the fear of, that association that they've pounded into people's minds. And it works. Fear really works. It's a very small number of people like myself, yourself, Bart, that are able to pull back and think, use our minds. I mean, even when I don't watch TV because it's garbage. And I usually try and I've told people, watch other channels from around the world, see what they are talking about that issue. You'll get nuanced arguments, a different perspective. They may be also check the neighboring countries. What are they saying about them? The friendly countries are going to be saying certain positive things. The enemy countries are going to say the complete different, have a different argument. With all that, you'll get all these perspectives and views, and you'll go, okay, this is really what's happening. You'll be able to discern. We don't do that. We have, because of the fight or flight, we have this simplicity. We want simple answers, quick answers, things that are easily to digest. Humans are naturally lazy by nature. You don't try and complicate things too much. You try and find a quick solution, easy solution. That's why associated solutions are easy to sell. You can sell a demon, you can demonize this or that and sell it. If you say it long enough and you've got a good group like Ansel Keats had, a good group that he controlled, and you can push a narrative long enough, everybody falls into line like sheep. Follow the leader, and there's no dissension. Any dissenters, they just get clubbered over with, or shadow banded, like yours truly, and that bald man, and probably yourself and many others. It's things that genes transcript to produce in our body that are required to regulate a number of functions, biological functions. To demonize those things is complete. And I don't demonize even insulin or glucagon or anything like that. I say they're out of homeostasis, but they're not They're not demonic, to be feared. Everybody in the low-carb community fears insulin. If you had very low insulin for a very long time, or IGF-1 or mTOR, guess what would happen? Your musculoskeletal structure would fall apart. You have to be brain dead to view those things. But the problem is, it's not that people need to be brain dead. People need to be conditioned. We've been conditioned from birth to fear things, to fear the unknown, to fear everything. Take a look at a child. He'll go out and grab a spider, grab a snake, won't even think about it. But if you instill fear, you try getting them to do that. They get it. It won't happen. So our culture instills fear in us, and then elites and others reinforce that fear, and the rest is history. Then you can push whatever narrative you like with fear, and if you're trying to use logic and trying to use something reasonable and data and stuff like that, you've got Buckley's chance. You can't win those arguments. It's like talking to a brick wall. It's an unwinnable argument. At that point, you go, okay, I surrender. You can't. It just is what it bloody is. Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. The compliment. Thank you. Those are kind words. Unnecessary, but kind. I wouldn't say brilliant. Okay. I'm just using common sense. And many other people that, like myself, use common sense as well. And they go, it's the problem is when this is another reason why, Stephen, I've always said to people, everybody that goes in and does any STEM, they should do engineering first. They should learn to think like an engineer as systems. You pull a bit here, that moves. You pull there, that moves. Things are interlinked and interacting and are constantly in flux and change, especially physiology, which has a lot of, you've seen that image of metabolism, and with the citric acid cycle over here, you look at that and you go, what? It's just extremely complicated. Minor variations and changes in inputs change things and throw things out quite a bit. Nothing is precisely measurable, So making assumptions, conclusions based on these sort of things is stupid. We work on data, inferences, and mechanistic sort of extrapolations and other things, and also archaeological, the N15 sort of data and many other things, to try and get our heads around not only what our species appropriate diet is, but what is normal physiology. RDIs, are they correct? No, they're the averages of a sick population, like a lot of things. The levels, the normal levels in blood tests and whatever else. It's a crazy world we live in the way things are done. But anyway, still can't walk across the ditch to see you, Harry. Once at some stage. And I've heard that salt on the carnivore diet acts like an antibiotic and reduces the number of beneficial bacteria. Oh, that's a new one to me. We come up with that association bullshit. It seems like another piece of bullshit in that regard. And then again, what do they mean by beneficial bacteria? Do I have an axe to grind on that? You'll hear the Vagoons talking about, remember, Prevotella. Most of the Vagoons say, what a great thing Prevotella is. Actually, studies showing an increase in Prevotella due to eating more plants, which is part of the family of the Firmicutes. So the big two groups are Firmicutes and Bifido. Bifido can grow with some plant foods, but does definitely grow with animal foods. Bifido, the beneficial ones. If you take a look at all the actual interleukins, all the actual studies that have actually looked, bifido for beneficial effects and beneficial effects in the immune system, where most of your immune system is in the gut. And we know that certain things like the C19 thing does decrease bifido and creates a lot of gut problems for people. So we know that. And a more species appropriate diet that grows that and sort of protects that more is far more beneficial in this sort of, biohazard environment. But my opinion on salt is that people should only consume salt to what their body demands. I find myself, it fluctuates. Sometimes I'll eat salt and I go, oh, it's too salty. That means my body doesn't need it. So I'll cut back. And then after a while, I'll feel like I need more. So it fluctuates. But since my, and I occasionally, when these sort of fluctuations happen, I do check my heart rate and stuff like that. And I notice, okay, it's around the 60 or 70 or sometimes down to the 50. And it tells me, whether things are lower or higher or whatever. So I keep an eye on those sort of things since having pre-existing conditions, cardiovascular, and it's one of the reasons out of a habit that it's become. But, and I sort of, that also I monitor for that in terms of calcium, because I've got calcium genetics, which can cause problems with my heart rate as well. So there's a lot of things that I have to keep an eye on. I do it less now because it's less of a problem. I've sort of nailed down the foods that I need to eat, and I sort of just eat them nearly instinctively every day. I don't really think too much about them. So that's much easier nowadays. Cecile, how are you? Good to have you here. And Lila Stuff, how are you as well? You're welcome. Now, does sunlight increase the hormone DHT? It seems to, look, it depends. It really depends. It's sort of a funny one in some regards. There seems to be, I've seen some research that shows yes, and other research that shows no, that it decreases. So is it genetic? These people are not on a carnivore diet. They're on a SAD diet. And when you have inverse relationships, I tend to basically say, well, that's a bust. It fails the Bradford-Hill criteria, because anything that is causal must always associate. Even to the tiniest level, it must associate. So if it's not associating, I would say it's a bust. Now, in terms of photo, remember I've got in my genetics photo bleaching. And the photo bleaching seems to indicate in some people, I don't know because I haven't checked with myself, so I can't claim anything. All I can, and I don't really care to why spend money on, who cares? I know I get photo bleaching. I've got genetics. I've checked it. I've shown you guys in live streams in the past on my 23andMe sort of information. You can go back and check my old live streams to get that information if you so desire. And I can get more viewing time, which is a benefit for me as well, since I put so much effort and there's a horrendous amount of videos that I've made. So you might as well help me out a bit. But in terms of in the follicles, the hair follicles, it seems in some studies to say that it does slightly increase with exposure to sunlight. Unclear. I do have alopecia as well, but as I've shown you guys, I've got plenty of hair. It's just grayer, a bit grayer, and actually it's a mix between grey and light sort of blonde, because blondness runs in our, probably from photo bleaching. You know, like you get those, some women that actually have, like, or men, the complete white type of hair. There's no grayness, it's just completely white. A lot of my hairs, only on the sides I get grey, but these up here are very, you can see over here, you can see very light. It's completely, the melanin is gone. So there's no grayness, it's just complete melanin. It's like a white streak. That's photo bleaching. For a long time, I wore hats. I avoided the sun to some extent and all that, to try and keep my hair from, because I noticed that when I was out of the sun, that didn't help. In recent years, I've just given up. I'm 59 now. I just turned 59. You know, what is it? About slightly over 10 days ago. 12 days, yeah. And I've given up on trying to prevent my hair from photo bleaching. It's just too much of a hassle. I like to go out, get the sun, get out in the, you know, in my breaks and all that. And so I've given up on that whole idea of preventing myself from losing pigment in my hair. I've got those genetics. I don't care anymore. Probably vanity has decreased. As you get older, vanity does decrease. I can tell you that. When you're young and, you know, racing after skirt, you tend to have you want to look your best for the ladies. But once you get to my sort of age, you go, oh, I give up. Not that I've given up, you know, I'm not, you know, over the hill, but trying to basically avoid the sun, or wearing a lot of caps, you know, and stuff like that. It's only when I go for long walks I'll put a hat on. Otherwise, I don't. When I go to work, I don't wear a hat. When I come back, I don't wear a hat. So I've given up on that whole idea. It's only on when I go to Salamanca on Saturday, because I'm walking quite a few, especially in the summertime when there's a lot of, you know, our UV down here can be very strong because of the weaker ozone. And for that reason, I don't want to, you know, get too much UV in a sense. So that's the only reason. But otherwise, I've completely given up on that whole idea. Okay, what do you know about these self-amplifying mRNAs that are currently developed in Japan? Very concerning. Yes, I would say so. But as you know, it's very hard to discuss this issue on YouTube and many other parts of social media. But that whole technology was a failure and a bust in oncology for cancer patients. They were being warned. Remember, I did a video years ago. There is actually in the C19 playlist, there's actually a video there covering that the doctors were warning patients after 2 years that if you've got these symptoms, rush to a hospital immediately. So you think that most of the symptoms that people have been getting were only a cause of that old technology? It's the same technology. The problem is that there's something wrong with the technology. It's got too many issues. It seems that it's the wrong approach. But that's, you know, I looked at that old oncology data, and when I saw that, that was it. I wasn't going to take any of that sort of stuff for that reason. I nearly lost my job over it, but anyway, better alive than in a new job rather than dead. So, yep, it's fine. It helps with people that have got like respiratory, a lot of mucus. My father he's 90 now and tends to actually have a bit more mucus that he develops in his lungs. And so I basically, and most of my relatives have died in older age, over 90 or over 100 in dad's part of the family, due to respiratory issues. And also they were in mountainous regions, so they probably were slightly deficient in vitamin D. And in the past, people were isolated in the winter. Now, because of, you know, modern transport and things are open, in the periods that people have got lower vitamin D status, they're actually interacting with people that can come from vastly distant places on the planet compared to the past. And so you're more vulnerable, as I pointed out in that other video. But I would say that NAC's fine. Don't go over a gram. Stick to 1 gram or less. Half a gram, not an issue. 1 gram, fine, depending on, if you're dealing with mold and dealing with other things, it can be helpful. In particular, for the 1 gram, for most people, half a gram. For older people like my father that have got a lot of, mucus that actually gets generated in the lungs, 1 gram is pretty good in breaking down that mucus and allowing him to breathe better. So, all good. Not on Zoom every night. Got my own dramas also. Fair enough. Yep. Hi, mate. How are you? KVT Hunter. Sounds like a TV series. If you have to choose, what is more beneficial for health? Pasteurized goat cheese or raw cow cheese? Look, raw is going to be best. It doesn't matter what it is, from what animal it is. Horse milk, goat milk, cow milk, whatever is going to be in that regard. In terms of I would think the goat would be superior to cow. It's got more short-chain fatty acids and more medium-chain triglycerides. Let's not forget that most of the medium-chain triglycerides are actually named after goats. That should tell you something. And it's much closer in its composition, the goat milk, in composition to human milk. So it seems to be more beneficial on anecdotal evidence. There is no scientific evidence anywhere in the literature that's going to tell you that it's superior or not. Raw over basically pasteurized. With pasteurization, people say, oh, it denatures the proteins. Yes, but so does the stomach denature the proteins. Get over it. That's not the biggest problem with is homogenization. That's where the biggest problem is. It's damaging the fats. You don't want homogenized. If all you can afford is pasteurized, have unhomogenized pasteurized, if that's all you can afford. When it comes to other things like lactoferrin, it's going to be lower, which helps the immune system. Interferon, that sort of one helps a bit. That most of the hormone stuff, the receptor sites are different, so that's just nonsense. When it comes to things like estrogen, that's irrelevant as well, because it's estrone, not estradiol, and which is less effective, and also it's very little. So a glass of milk probably gives you about 6 nanograms, where a male will produce 50-odd thousand nanograms per day, and a woman up to 600,000 nanograms. So pretty much 5 is like irrelevant. It's a blip. Remember, your hormones are always being produced in your body. The level is what is different depending on what you're eating and a whole lot of other factors. But if your insulin was to 0, you'd be dead. The same thing. Only when you're dead, all the hormones are 0. All the hormones are somewhere, but there are certain ranges depending on what's happening in the physiology, what the inputs are in terms of food, nutrients, and all that sort of stuff. And they fluctuate depending on the amino pools that come through, and then they decline, and then new ones come, and there's these fluctuations. There's also circadian ones as well. Yes. unfortunately, my co-workers tend to be shedding viruses and shedding other stuff constantly in my workplace. I made a point yesterday. It just affects me a sort of a low grade, but what can you do until retirement? Then I can be outdoors continuously and safer. Yes, but an office work environment, especially open plan, everything spreads. So yes. Anyway, what do you think is maximum days one should fast for the immune system general reset? 72 hours. But I would go to 80 and a couple of extra hours in that regard. And then obviously, go slowly in reintroducing food after that. And then once you've actually, after the first day, the second day, start eating more protein and fats, but in particular prioritize proteins, because you really, proteins, especially glutamine, the interchangeable, is important for the immune system in rebuilding it. You need amino acids, basically. So a species-appropriate diet is very important for your immune system. Do you think hormones decline and growth hormone declines is protective? Do you think replacement is indicated? I don't think replacement is indicated. Do I think hormones decline? They vary between people. And because we don't have any efficacious studies, we don't know whether that is due to people's diets, people's lifestyles, people's genetics, because there's a lot of variability. Even people's age profile is very different in that regard. I mean, we can look at, for instance, the Spanish lady that lived to 117, and her telomere caps were nearly done. It was really damaged and all that. But her cells were functioning more like youthful cells. So there was a less inflammation and less immunosenescence. So, longevity isn't what most longevity experts think. I'm going to do a video next week to sort of go into the nuancing and clarify some of this sort of stuff, because there's still a lot of misinformation in that regard. So I don't want to touch too much on that subject matter, because I want to do a video and go and do a really deep dive into it. I'm boiling my tap water now for 5 minutes. I'll let it through paper coffee filter to reduce microplastic. Studies have shown that it contains up to 90% less, but only works with hard water. I haven't actually looked at those studies, to be honest. If your body is working properly, microplastics are in the actual, they've detected in the wind. Like, they're all over the place. Things break down and degrade into small, fine particles, and then they circulate around all over the place. I think it's pretty hard to get away from them, to be honest. So I don't know how we can actually sort of overcome this problem. Supporting the immune system is really important, but whether or not, possibly reducing exposure, people still microwave in plastic. You should only be microwave, if you're going to microwave, just do it in glass. and cover it over with a paper towel. Unfortunately, you've got to be very careful with paper towels as well. There are some manufacturers that put plastic in them, so you check the labels. Very few of them do, but there are some of the cheapo stuff. So, and some of the stuff that they say, oh, this is really sturdy and won't tear very easily and all that. It's, like they put plastic now in some of the clothing to hold the shape or whatever. Well, that's against your skin, and your skin can absorb things. It's pretty hard to get away from a plastic society. It's, sort of diminishing returns in trying most things. You'll exhaust yourself. No. I pretty much eat as many as I feel like. I don't really, in the end, everything gets denatured, broken down into simple fats, simple amino acids, and if there is any sugars there, from the animal source, even simple sugars. As long as your stomach's functioning properly, and any foreign proteins and whatever else, it's going to upset the immune system. Inflammasome is going to go, something nasty and evil's coming through. So, yes. So, common sense, people, common sense. That is good. Insulin kind of gave a workout on the cruise I went on recently. So Scotty, we overdid it on that and all that. Okay. I can't say that I'm, that when I go on holidays that I'm a carnivore monk. No. I can say it's probably when I do go off the rails a bit. You justify it to yourself. I'm on holidays. I want to enjoy the foreign cuisine. Let alone, it's hard sometimes to find in the sort of tourist areas anything that's close to a carnivore diet. I remember I was in Indonesia once and I grabbed Mira and I said, I need to get some cheese and all that. And eventually she took me to a Dutch business that was from an Dutch expat. And they had all sorts of cheeses from all over Europe, in particular from Holland, from Netherlands. Sorry, Netherlands. You're Holland to me. Hollow and Holland, hollow. Okay, now that I've insulted you comprehensively, I'll move on. See, that's not what you do. You say sorry and then you insult and then you sort of get away with anything. Isn't that what the politicians do? Maybe I should go into politics. No. And yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting trying to find things, but it was very expensive. God, it was expensive, like 50% more expensive than you'd find in Australia. And you go, ugh. So I was sort of balked at it. I bought a bit, and then I got the imported stuff from Australia, type things, which probably didn't have the best bacteria and whatever else, is what I got while I was there on holidays, Scotty. Yes, anyway, let me continue. Harry, I've been watching your channel. Thank you. Appreciate it. For a long time, and some of the supplements typically come up and new stuff you think now show promise, peptides or else specifically for the immune gut. I'm very cagey about too many supplements. I think we can get enough from animal foods, as long as we have variety, like crustaceans, But then again, it's the sourcing, because in the Northern Hemisphere, there's a lot of pollutants. It's a problem in many parts, Baltic area and North Sea and many other parts is, and even parts of like the Mediterranean, in particular, the more central and western part where it's more industrialized, you can get more runoff into the actual Mediterranean. And because of the insufficient flushing can be another issue. So there's a lot of factors that have to be taken into consideration in that regard. So I'm more keen on people trying to get most of the things from the diet. For me, most of the actual supplements like Vicetin, which is an senolytic, like taurine and all that, most of these things I use as biohacks, if you know what I mean. I mean, even citrulline, like if you're going to have hanky-panky learning, half an hour before, rather than taking the blue pill with all the side effects, take a few grams, like 6 grams of citrulline. Yes, an alternative boner in that regard. Yes, good vasodilator, increases nitric oxide. So that's, I would use it more strategically in those sort of ways, or for reducing immunosenescence, eliminating a lot of these sort of things out of my body. These are the sort of strategies that I use when, obviously things like TA1 peptide is really good at improving the immune system, but also taurine to lower immunosenescence. Vitamin D, have a good vitamin D status. That is going to be very helpful as well. So, and if you have to supplement because of your lifestyle, make sure it's medium chain triglyceride, the oil, or coconut oil, nothing else. And if you've got any sensitivity to salicylates, MCT only. I need to clarify myself and correct myself, because I didn't last time in the video. There is the salicylate problems that many Northern Europeans do have. They're very unclear. So they're so-called declarations that they make are more politically orientated. Remember, Google owns YouTube. Google has like big data centers, has AI systems, and has a whole lot of other programs. Now they're competing with Meta, and obviously Trump seems to have a bit of interaction with Meta. And then you've got, Mark Zuckerberg recently meeting up with pretty much with Trump. And so there's competition to get AI services. Bill Gates as well with his AI. So you've got all these big players that are trying to get into the federal government, because it's the big cow. Now, the state governments are all medium-sized cows, and the big cow, where most of the money that they can get, and there's a bit of competition there. And so obviously they have to seem that they are more Trumpish in order to try and win contracts with US government. So do I buy that they've actually changed their mindset? Definitely not. If the Democrats get in the next election, they'll be back to the old censorship. You can be certain about that. So no, I don't trust them. Simple as that. They'll sell anything and do anything to basically keep the bucks coming in, the dollars. So I would not trust them at all or believe them. But strategically, it makes sense under the current administration to seem that you're following an anti-censor agenda. But would I trust them? Hell no. Johnny, you are late. I'll have to call that bald man to send Ted around and sort you out. Ted does get around. Yes. But he better be careful, because I do have a Tasmanian devil close by, and that could sort him out for good. Rip him to pieces. G'day, Alex. How are you, mate? I've been using an infrared lamp above my workplace for a while now, 660 to 860 nanometers, 54 watt. My hair is starting to grow back in the bald spots. Vertigo also disappears slowly. Red light therapy is, I don't have it open now because it actually isn't. It's the, see that? The strip. Yeah, but I just have it general. I don't have it on top of my head. I have it just basically hitting my face and all that. I have heard that people, as I said, because my biotin and my extra protein, MSM and taurine seems to have fixed my alopecia and all that sort of stuff. So I have less reason to basically put a lamp over my head. But interesting. It does have a back thing that I could stick. Maybe I stick it on the top of my monitor. Interesting. Thanks for that. But I have heard about it. People who are talking about it and raving about it. That you've actually put it into practice and noticed improvements. Good for you. So anybody else out there that has that sort of issue, give it a try. These frequencies do seem to actually help better circulation in the actual scalp area and in the skin generally. Remember when we go out in the sun early in the morning or late in the dawn, and so you get that dawn effect and the dawn and dusk effect. The level of near infrared and infrared, these sort of frequencies, is much higher because UV and blue light and the other frequencies lower. You get more of these frequencies, and they also have a benefit to your circadian clocks, but also to your melanopsin, picking them up and stuff like that. But what they also do, which is very important, they actually increase nitric oxide. That means more nitric oxide. That's another reason why I sort of use the citrulline pathway to basically increase my nitric oxide, because that helps my scalp as well. It's basically the nitric oxide increase from these frequencies. Should I add more nitric oxide with this method? Yeah, I could, but I'm sometimes, like other people, I can be lazy sometimes and forget, to turn it on. So, but yeah, it is the nitric oxide side. It does increase these frequencies, but also it has an effect. One of those frequencies has also an effect on the mitochondria, so they actually work a bit faster, which means that you're producing more ATP. Obviously, you can heal that tissue way better. So it's from both those avenues, getting better performing mitochondria, and on the other hand, getting better vasodilation in the scalp. And that's important, because if you don't have good vasodilation, you end up with your scalp becoming more harder in a sense as well. Isn't as soft, and yes, and that can be an issue with circulation. So yes, good to hear. Thank you for sharing. Harry Fermatella is the bacterioides. It probably is. The Vagoon says that it's Firmicutes. I just looked it up as Prevotella. So, yep, thanks for correcting me. I've just presumed it was one of them because they've been arguing that Prevotella from the Firmicutes family. So the only thing that I did was I looked for Prevotella and oxidative stress and in the other certain interleukins. I didn't look in any further. So yes, you caught me out. How dare you not look into it any further? Yes, I only looked at that one study that I put in the vegan falsehoods, you know, the one that I've got, the playlist. Yeah. So, you know, I'm just looking at, you know, fighting the Vagoons, you know, you only spend so much time and energy on them. So, yes. But then again, is it the same strain? I can't remember because there are different strains of Prevotella. Are they all called Bacteroides? Are they all that? Or is there a Firmicutes one? I don't know. Ugh, it's a long time ago. So I'm getting confused with age. Anyway, can't get everything right. We do make errors now and then, but good for calling me out. Just to mention, as per the longevity video, as we age with bone marrow, turns into fatty marrow. Well, actually, not everyone. There are some people that have gone on ketogenic diets and have actually reduced this and increased red blood cells inside. You know, so they've actually done the opposite. So I'm trying to think of the lady that actually did it. And she did really hardcore ketogenic and she was in her late 40s. She's married to one of those influencers, Michael something, I can't remember now. But she actually did like a scan and actually showed that her bones, you know, had not had these fatty sort of infiltrations and increases. So, and people in varied ages do have different things like thiamine, as many people shrink, but if you can go to tribal people that have much better thiamine size and less shrinkage compared to Westerners. Variability. We know that taurine can actually prevent remodeling of the heart, but also plays an important role in T lymphocytes in the thymus. And so there's speculation on my part that it also helps maintain and preserve the thymus like it does with the heart. But nobody's actually done any research on it. But I notice that people that have more on a species appropriate diet, N of ones, tend to have better thiamines than people on regular sort of stuff in similar age brackets. So there are differences. And so the diet, but without research, you can only extrapolate and say, well, these people tend to have these probably, so something in the diet is helping them. But there's no science that I can point to because nobody's looked at it. Nobody's willing to pay for it. It just is what it is. I'm not that guy. And others say salt is toxic and people microdosing are toxic because eating the whole salt could cause death thoughts. That's just stupid. It's not even worth a reply. That's how stupid it is. Well, there you've just answered it. You know, since it's in the food, is that saying that the food is toxic? It's absolute nonsense. All plants and all animals consume. You put a block of salt out, and cows and sheep and horses will go and lick it. Okay, Animals seek salt all over the place, but it varies up and down and all that. You know, the key one of the two key electrolytes in the bloodstream is salt and calcium. Okay, so sodium and calcium, which comes from salt. Okay, and salt just has a whole lot of other trace minerals and stuff like that, and chloride as well. Let's not forget. And they are critical to the body. So anybody demonizing salt, can too much salt cause death? Yes, too much water can cause death. There's a lot of things in excess outside a certain range that can cause problems. But to argue that because salt can cause it, well, so can water. So is water toxic now? The dose makes the difference. You know, and this is the problem. A lot of people extrapolate from nonsense and make arguments. It's like vitamin D. Oh, vitamin D, it's a rodent killer. Excess of anything will kill you. Vitamin D will bring in calcium. Calcium metabolism in rats, in rodents, is very poor. And that is why it kills them. But the equivalent of the 800 IUs that they give to rats to kill them is like over 500,000 IUs. And humans have been consuming even higher than that, much higher, and still weren't dying. And if you go back to the early part of the 20th century, there was a period there with a lot of rickets, and people were consuming something for a period of time until they were told to stop consuming so much because they were getting constipation, stuff like that, because it can affect the motility and all that, too much calcium and vitamin D. And so they were consuming something like 20 milligrams, which is just massive in comparison. So, but they weren't dying. So our physiology is completely different from rats in that regard. It's like a lot of things. People argue just absolute reductionist nonsense and the most extreme sort of things. Because if you look at the average rat is about 123 grams. The average person is about 70 kilos. Substantial difference. So for that volume, you need a lot of vitamin D, like in the multiple millions, before you can get to those really toxic levels for the physiology of humans. Nobody's going to consume like that, and I would never recommend that. You know, the highest I would recommend is like 5,000 IUs. I wouldn't recommend above that, and only in winter. The rest of the year, get it from the sun. Okay, and it's because I make the argument, about that we no longer live in isolated communities in winter. We're still trading and we're open for interactions with people from all over the world in a period when our vitamin D status is lower, which is in the winter. But in the past, we were isolated. We weren't trading, so it didn't really matter. But when we traded in the summer periods and autumn periods, guess what? A lot of diseases moved around via the trade. Today, it's via trade and flight. So, and that's why we have to rethink how we utilize, how we talk about vitamin D status, because vitamin D now has become, in our modern world, has different requirements in the winter compared to the past when we lived in isolated communities and it was less of an issue. So it was only in the months of trade that was more of an issue, but then you could get out in the sun. So you actually, a lot of jobs that were done indoors, you know, it was people that were doing more of that, less farmers dying, but more of these other people that were doing indoor activities in the little towns, more of them were dying. And they also had more contact with merchants and traders and all that, so they're more susceptible to getting a bigger viral load. So all these things have now changed. Our work the majority of people now work in offices, in closed environments where things circulate. Shedding, they're more susceptible to shedding because the person right next to them could be 1 meter or 2 meters away. That's very close in comparison to the past. So things have changed, and people fixated with nonsense jump on these little things and go, oh, they used to do that this way or that way. Or I saw a study that showed that it'll kill rodents, or this or that, and they extrapolate from that. That's reductionist thinking. It's not even taking into consideration human physiology differences. It's like people argue about, like, fagoons that argue about that certain people that do ketogenic diets, the rats that do ketogenic diets, are very inflamed. I wonder why. Do you realize that it's nearly impossible to put a rat into ketosis? You have to push them all the way up to nearly close to well over 90% fat and very little protein or sugar in the system in order to force ketosis on them. It's physiologically, it's against their own physiology that you have to push them that far to achieve it. Where humans, take out sugar, doesn't matter how much protein, you can fall into low-grade ketosis or varied ketosis. But for rats, you have to really push them. That is very stressful. That's why those stress markers go up, and that's why they don't even have good fatty acid metabolism. So their liver gets overwhelmed. That's why the effects on P53. It's bizarre that people will use that as an argument. This is the problem. These people are crackpots or ill-informed or have very little understanding about a lot of things, and they will use these sort of stupid arguments about things. You remove critical electrolytes from your body and see how long and how well you become. I've seen many people that actually fall into real health problems in that regard. Now, if you eat more protein, because protein will give you taurine, and that taurine has the ability at the nephrons in your kidneys to recycle and hold on to more of the actual ions of sodium. And that's where you get that's when your own body, I've noticed the more meat I consume, I require less sodium, less salt. And if I'm eating less, I notice that I'm not getting that insulin bump to hold on to sodium. And, if I drop my protein to much lower levels and go up more on fat, like ketogenic diets, I'm dumping salt. But in summer, like in winter, I consume less. In summer, due to my genetics, I sweat like a hog and I lose a lot of electrolytes. So I have to eat more and consume more. And I usually use salts that have got trace minerals and also, to hold on to that sort of stuff. Because there are some genetic differences and some people will sweat more than others. I tend to have that. Even in winter, I sweat. Most people don't. Very light when I walk. I don't wear heavy clothing. It's usually a singlet, this is winter, and a flannelette shirt. That's it. So I don't feel the cold as well as much. Like my father, probably from genetics, these are sort of, we have more brown adipose tissue, which means we produce more heat internally. So I can heat up quite a bit. And in the tropics, God, I just sweat like a hog. I have to use a lot of salt there to prevent getting arrhythmias. So, there are differences in some people dump very easily like me, others don't hold on to. So there are differences, genetic differences in different tribal groups and different populations. So obviously there is different sensitivities, and you have to take those things into account. That's why I say, how did your ancestors eat? If they consumed less, consume less. They consumed more, consume more. So the body adapted genetically, shifted, because we've had like 10,000 years of, 5 to 10,000 years of different levels of civilization. And that also has had an effect on our physiology in the way we manage some of these things compared to some tribal people. So there is that variability, like calcium that I've talked about before, especially pastoral people, they absorb less. So you need to eat more. Otherwise, if you go paleo, like I did, you'll get arrhythmias. So it's a bit more nuanced. People like this who are completely ignorant, buffoons, they don't understand this. They just come up with nonsense, typical ex-vegan, just weirdo. Is a weirdo. It was a weirdo at school, and aggressive towards other people, and is a weirdo. Shouldn't. I hope he leaves our community at some stage. He's just a weirdo. Let's put it that way. What do you what do you say, you mean? Okay, not day, say. Auto correction probably did it. Say to the quote, recent data shows that overeating saturated fats acids promotes greater visceral fat storage than overeating unsaturated fatty acids. Nonsense, because it's on sad dieters. That's what it is. It's sad dieters. So there's a difference in the profile. Like in a more insulin type, you will store more of that. In a low carb state, you will oxidize more of that. So it has to do with that. Like a lot of our like triglycerides are made up more of either PUFA, MUFA, and palmitate, mostly palmitate, which is a saturated fat. But some of the other saturated fats will tend to seem that in a non-low carb state seem to sort of, excluding stearic acid, seem to basically accumulate in tissue, like visceral tissue in that regard. So it's not exactly, it's nuanced, if you know what I mean. It's more nuanced because there are, and the reason why you know it's nuanced and it's bullshit is because there are inverse relationship studies. So low carb studies show the complete opposite, visceral fat decreasing and higher oxidation of saturated fats. So it's specific to, if you take a look at most plant-based diets will tend to have a much higher PUFA rate than and mono rate. And so they work slightly different. Also, in the mitochondria, there's a bit of a difference, like stearic acid in particular, and then palmitate, tend to cause a reverse electron transport, which they'll actually cause a signaling through complex 1 in the electron chain. And so that will actually release a bit of ROS, reactive oxygen species, and it will be specific to be detected. The quantities is specific to be detected by messengers within the actual cytosol, and that can actually influence directly the actual our genes to create sort of the environment for more biogenesis of mitochondria. So you get signaling that goes to the genetics of the mitochondria, but also to the cell to promote support for biogenesis of new mitochondria. So that will actually then improve the ATP production and sort of utilization of a lot of those substrates. So to improve the, the functioning of beta oxidation as well. So consuming certain things in the ketogenic state seems to be slightly different in a Randall cycle induced state, where you're promoting slightly higher insulin signaling because of the carbohydrates into the viscera and into the actual adipose cells, and you're going to get fat going in both, in a sense. But in a much lower Randall cycle sort of state, you're going to get that being transported out to be utilized by VLDL and LDL. And whatever isn't used, it will go to specifically and be offloaded because there's lower insulin. It usually goes to the adipose tissue, to the white fat around your midsection primarily. So it has to do with both the level of insulin signaling, which means sugar, and Randall cycle activation. And so you get this increase in trigs as well that contributes to it. It's associated in that relationship. So it seems that, yes, under a SAD diet profile with higher levels of insulin in the system and all that signaling, it seems that the receptor sites in both the visceral and these subcutaneous are all activated, and they're all getting more storage into them. And that's dependent on genetics as well, how much. So it's not like everybody gets the same. No. Certain genetics will put it more into the subcutaneous and other genetics more into the viscera. And you can actually see those sort of people. They're called toffies. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside. They tend to have higher levels of visceral fat and also higher, and because they don't produce new fat cells, they have more higher problems in terms of issues of that sort, and like diabetes and many other things, because lack of storage capacity, which can clear these things out of the bloodstream much faster because you've got more storage capacity. But at the end of the day, you do need the Randall cycle to be activated. And since most of these studies and people that are doing these sort of nonsense studies don't really understand this, they're going to conclude that, oh, it must be this that's causing more of it. No, it's not. It's due to, and then at the same time, it depends on, because not all the saturates, there are variations, and I've seen inverse relationships. And when you see inverse relationships, even amongst SAD dieters, so there may even be some genetics involved. We really haven't teased it out. So I couldn't give you a definitive answer, but it's definitely associated quite clearly when there's more sugar in the system and elevated insulin that is required for things to go into these fat cells. And then genetics affects where things go and get stored. Okay, so you're actually pushing, these anabolic hormones are pushing growth, mTOR, IGF-1 and insulin in the fat cells. It's not only in the musculoskeletal, that's what leucine does. Okay, leucine doesn't do it, doesn't actually interact with those hormones in the fat cells, because leucine doesn't work like that. Only sugar works like that. Okay, so this is the difference. But because when you put sugar in the system, especially more sugar, excess sugar, these receptor sites on the adipose tissue start getting activated because they're waiting for the excess triglycerides and stuff like that. So triggers go up with excess sugar. That's the issue. So it's a sad dieter, and they're extrapolating from that and making out these sort of conclusions and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a bit annoying when you have to put up with that sort of nonsense. And that's why I mean, because it's more nuanced, most people just go for the easy answer. It's just what it is. When can we use animal studies to extrapolate into human mechanistic studies? It's more in terms of, like, for instance, toxicity. So, and even there, it's going to be a problem, like as I said earlier, with the vitamin D, very different in calcium metabolism. But it's sort of where I use it is I say this compound has this beneficial effect in the rat, but it may also have in humans, because all it seems to have in the rats and other species. And that's the sort of way you can actually see it. The mRNA stuff was really bad in the rats. It's actually worse in the rats than us. But that's sort of giving it away that there's an issue here. But it's really hard to extrapolate too much. So where I use it is I use it specifically when people say, for instance, remember I showed you that one about leucine in a fasted state. They did it on both humans and rats, and it showed similar. And the other one that had to do with the protein, high protein, 70%, didn't kill the rat, made a big rat, very strong, big kidneys and stuff like that to filter. So it ended up becoming a super rat. And humans wouldn't grow like that either. So there's a difference. But at least it shows that in other species, that high protein isn't going to be toxic, that what people argue and all that. So obviously we can't do human studies, but most people can actually say, look at my father. I put him on he's got kidney cancer. And since he's doing more animal-based and all that, his kidneys have grown bigger. His blood pressure has come down because he had higher blood pressure due to kidney atrophy. He reduced his plants. He's been redoing that. Initially, it was hard, but eventually it did work. And that was when he was in his mid-70s, and he'd become more frail. His muscles had atrophied and stuff like that. And I said, Dad, look at you. This is 15 years ago. And I argued with him to start, probably about 14 to be more precise, which was a bit about after a year when I started going paleo at that stage, because I realized that, my previous lifestyle was a mess 15 years ago. So it was about 14 years to be more precise. Corrected myself again. God, what will the world think? But Dad at the time, I gave him more protein. And then we found out a bit after that he had the kidney cancer and stuff like that, higher blood pressure and stuff like that. And I said to him, look, I've looked, and that was, I'd already looked into some stuff. I hadn't come across that study, but I'd actually looked at within the sort of community, the paleo community, and some people were eating more meat and seeing benefits for their kidneys. And I said, Dad, let's give it a try. I said, your kidneys are not, yes, they've atrophied, but they're not for dialysis yet or anything like that. Let's give this a try. Because from what I've seen with my own health, it usually what doctors tell you, it's the complete opposite. So let's try the complete opposite. And I got him to start eating more protein and put him on leucine supplementation, stuff like that. Well, his kidneys started growing, becoming bigger. His cancer halved. His kidneys got bigger in the last sort of decade or plus. and he's done much better. So all I can say, that was from a mechanistic animal study. So it's hard to extrapolate too much because our physiologies are different. Because I'd heard about that from the paleo community, but nobody actually ever showed me a study. That's the problem back in paleo days. People said things, but never backed it up with anything. It was really probably because there was less stuff that was easy to get off the net back in those days. Maybe that was the reason. Maybe I shouldn't be so critical of those people. Now it's much easier to download things and get access to things. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So yeah, you can extrapolate to a certain degree. You have to be very careful. And then you have to do N of ones and look and try and find some supporting human studies that indicate that some sort of benefit. So it's not enough. So you have to be very careful with rodent mechanistic studies for a lot of reasons. Because the majority of them are that they got very different physiology and all that. So it's very hard. There we go. Not that I don't use them, I do, but I'm very careful the way I use them as well, especially nowadays. So, and we have to, and all that. And I think we have to do more within our community, more tests, more proper studies, not like some of those jokers did a while ago that Bart called out. But yeah, they can be useful, but you have to be careful how you interpret them, is what I'm trying to say. Hanky panky equals mechanism 3x yolks 2 times a day. Good for you, Alex. God. My subscribers tend to be a bit more adventurous. As you can see, learning, you'll pick up a lot of tips from some of these characters. I'll just be a bit careful. Some of their tips could be quite risky. Yes, I meant the biohack. Any new people talk about a lot for gut healing. Look, there's a number of. I do intend to go through. I'm not going to discuss it here, but I do intend next month to go through. I've been reviewing some supplements and reviewing some different strains for a number of different things. I've also been looking at kits, testing kits online and all sorts of things. So I don't want to go into it too deep and give too much away. I do have competition out there, but I will be making some videos looking into some of the strains. And I mean, you can already go and look at some of my videos that I've done. Better Flora is that German one is really good for a number of things. So people should consider it and look into it. Yeah, it's fixing up your gut microbiome and your leaky gut. So that's what you're talking about. If you want to consult, you've got people like Stefan that's here. He's pretty good. He does. Bart is another person that you can actually contact, because I don't do consultancies. I used to, but it nearly burnt me out because I do have a day job, a father to look after, many other things in my life. So yeah, it taxes my time. But I will be doing more videos on this sort of stuff, and I already have a number of videos covering these things. Raymond, yes, good evening to you as well. Do you think Carnivore, despite the NT5 data, can mess with some biochemistry, maybe snips and stuff like that? No, it's just all nonsense. It's associated, all that sort of stuff. You said some of the, what do you say? Maybe some snips have issues with saturated fats, for example. I need calcium for blood sugar in carnivore, not with carb. You've got the genes that I have, the calcium ones. Okay. Look, obviously the N15 data is the ancestral stuff, what we've been, every human on the planet. But in terms of certain adaptations and certain steps, like, you know, for instance, if you eat pastured, grass-fed, whatever, it will have more carotenoids. But those carotenoids can't be converted by some people. Some people have, like myself, 32% reduction in carotenoid conversion. Others have even much lower, which means that if you're not getting retinol from eggs, from things like liver, from things like cod liver, stuff like that, because this was Irish and people in parts of Northern Europe and all that, that were getting a lot of cod liver, so the body actually down-regulated the conversion of carotenoids, like beta-carotene. And so you need to get it then more from the animal foods, because if you're not getting it, you're going to have vitamin A sort of deficiency issues and symptoms. So that can be an issue for certain people. Obviously, we're not like Paleolithic people. Because of the agricultural period, we have these varied snips that have been introduced, and so we have issues with, you know, around dairy products, around retinol, and a number of other certain things and conversions of, so, like for instance, some people have an issue with certain enzymes that can cause, like the TMA not being converted to TMAO, and that can actually give them like a fishy, their skin can smell fishy in a sense, and usually that gets corrected with riboflavin, and riboflavin is much higher in dairy than in, and it'll be populations that have had a dairy past that will have more of this genetics than populations in Africa where you don't see it. So again, it's due to the pastoral genetics and these sort of changes in the, 24% when it comes to calcium. And I'm not sure what the percentage this is much rarer, but it's a very small percentage, but it's slightly higher in people from Central Asia and Europe, where there's more pastoralism. So I sort of think that there is probably some, they were getting so much that the body sort of down-regulated slightly those enzymes, and now that we're getting far less, we need more in order to get it to work properly. And the MTHFR is another one, which I've got as well. I've got all the colourful stuff. I don't have the smelly fish stuff, so I'm not a smelly fish. But I do have the MTHFR and a few others. So, which is the 677T, which is the sort of the worst type. But again, I do have a 5-year-old or plus year-old video called Methylation Part 1. Yes, what a boring title. Yes, I know, but very good information. How riboflavin corrects the functioning of this issue. And a lot of rare disorders, across the board rare disorders, are affected by deficiencies in 3 key B vitamins: thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin. And they're all involved in energy production, all 3. So usually the people have rare disorders, it's usually a deficiency in one of these 3. And these 3 are very important. And depending on some of your other genetics, like calcium metabolism and many other things, it usually indicates where it's coming from, pastoral, non-pastoral, whatever else, or just some genetic abnormality that emerged for whatever else, you were taking Tylenol. You're a Democrat and taking a whole lot of Tylenol and cause it to yourself. How crazy. Have you seen that video? some of the TikTok. We're going to consume as much as possible. Really? You're going to want to poison yourself because you want to be against JFK Jr. How demented some people are is all I can say. Crazy stuff. People will jump on any silly bandwagon. But yeah. But the thing is, that's why I make it quite clear to people that a lot of these so-called issues that people claim, they are coming from research which is based on sad dietists, so I wouldn't put too much weight on those things. In that regard, Zuckerberg should be behind bars. Facebook group dealing with vax injuries were shut down directly by his orders. Yes, I know. I had a few warnings as well. Let me put it that way. Even my early ones on vitamin D was ridiculous. Some of the stuff that got pulled or I got sort of censored for. And it was, I had on YouTube, all the early vitamin D stuff when back in if you go back to my C19, you'll actually see that I'm covering all those sort of things. Crazy stuff, absolute crazy stuff. But yeah, I have very little respect for these characters. They'll do anything that will give them this, and they've got no ethics whatsoever. But unfortunately, they have got a lot of power. Thank you. I know the wife. High intensity health. Yeah. Was the one who, has that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the Mike. I forget his last name. Yeah, thanks, Scotty. Yeah. She actually was put herself in a scanner and actually showed that. So, yeah, that's his name. But which supplements, vitamins, minerals are helpful for dry fasting? Well, if you're going into dry fasting, B vitamins are very important for a lot of functions, in particular those three, as I said, for energy: thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin. You want to get a methylated B vitamin complex that doesn't have any crap, has most of them in the sort of lower range, and I would basically load up over 3 days and then go into it, because some of them will actually stay in your system up to 30 days or 33 days for B6, and many others will have a varied amount that they will stay in the system. They will decline over that period, but they will stay in that system for quite some time. So there is an advantage. And I've done, I think my longest dry fast was 3.5 days. I wouldn't do really very long unless you're, you've got somebody looking after you, looking over you. If you notice any symptoms, you're not feeling really great, stop it. Don't put yourself at risk is what I'm trying to say. So, but noticed after 1 day he had gone in it without being in ketosis. I mean, I'd already done, got myself, I lowered my protein, lowered everything, pushed my fats up, got myself into ketosis. I started doing exercise to deplete my glycogen and all that and I noticed my ketones going up, and I go, oh, fine, now I can do it. Because now, and the reason why Bart was getting problems with his back and stuff like that was simple. He couldn't hydrate himself. His insulin would have taken about, to get to those low levels where he can ramp up fat oxidation, would take about 3 days. So you have to be, when you do when I do, how I do it to be safe, dry fast, I get myself into high levels of ketones, in high levels of fat oxidation. And that means also that insulin and glucose are going to be very low. And usually my glucose will be something like 3.7, 3.9, 3, maybe 4.1. It will fluctuate depending on the exercise. If I've exercised quite a bit, it'll jump up for a short period of time up to 4.5, and it will come down millimoles. So once you get into that stage, then going across to a dry fast, not an issue, because now you're producing heaps of metabolic water because you're in this high ketosis state. So it's not going to be a problem to do. But if you go into it with elevated blood sugars, elevated insulin, ain't going to work. You're going to be punished for it. So whenever I've gone into doing dry fast, is I put myself into deep ketosis and then I go into it. And it means that my ketones will even go higher. And that means my fat oxidation is really ramped up. And that means the production of metabolic water is going to be ramped up as well. So really important. You're welcome. Just Jewel, how are you, mate? With a 3 in the nails, that claims. It's very toxic because it claims it, so that it's toxic because it has LD50 value, does it? Yeah, it's just more nonsense. It's just more nonsense, He claims a lot of things. He can't provide one piece of evidence for all his claims. He can't. Until I don't know why people don't call him out and say, show us the evidence. The biggest problem is nobody's calling him out to show evidence for his claims. If you're making a claim, show evidence. When I make claims, I've actually got videos to back my claims up, or I show you evidence. The problem is he's claimed a lot of things, but never shown people any good, credible evidence. And that should tell you a lot, that he's basically just using sound bites, clickbaiting, and stuff like that. But he also shows how ignorant and lazy he is as well. But he's got this persona, this aggressive personality, because he was quite aggressive and violent at school as well. You can go back and check his and people like that come across very confident, very aggressive and all that, some people gravitate to that. They see that as a strength, but don't realize that strength. A lot of propagandists like Goebbels, Hitler use this method, and it works because it sort of arouses this emotion inside us. That's why I say, keep your emotions under control, and think, what are they telling you? What's the angle? You've got to be a cynic or a, outside the box person, maverick like myself, because that's the sort of person that I was. Probably didn't help much in my career. I probably could have got into senior managers if I kept my mouth shut, which I didn't. So it has worked against me. But also it means that I can live with myself. And I don't basically subscribe to nonsense and bullshit. Can too high protein cause high blood pressure? Something needs to tend to find that with salt added to, I get high. Look, like anything, excess, because that's quite high. What are you? So Yeah, that's very high. You know, when you get up to about above 4 point, what was it? 4.3. We did an experiment. 4.3 around or whatever. That at that level, you build quite a bit of muscle, but also you tear down your adipose tissue quite a bit. At that level, it's excessive. Compared to the top 4.35, you're about 35% above that. That's a lot. Why are you eating this amount? You know, just think of the amino pool that you're putting into your body. It's really hard to manage. That's probably, and then adding salt, which draws water, is going to increase the volume inside the bloodstream. Not a good thing. So, you know, that's excessive. And even top-end bodybuilders don't do that. They do 4 point, at most 3.5 to 4, at maximum 4. 3.5 is what is sort of recommended, unless you're doing the level where you're basically working your body like the sand people, the Kalahari, that the research is done on them. It was Cordain did that work in Africa and in Namibia, or the Western African state of Namibia. And those people were going out like more than half a day through the Kalahari Desert, really harsh, carrying a lot of weight for hours. Not even bodybuilders do that. They were consuming, on average, about 4 grams per kilo body weight. What you're doing there is 5 point, it's nearly 6. It's way too high. So even at top-end bodybuilding, you know, 3.5 or 3 or, you know, that's about 240, 37.8, or let's say 340. It's a sort of 340 and 350 of what Jonathan does, who's, you know, winning records and winning bodybuilding competitions in the UK. And he's over 6 foot. He's a big, tall bloke. He's big and very heavy, and he's doing about 250. What you're doing is just, for your size and all that, is just way above. Who told you that level? I mean, 5.886 times, not a good idea. You're really putting the strain on your body to sort of try and manage that volume, your kidneys and everything else trying to manage. Just excessive. Why are you doing it? Not a smart idea. I wouldn't, unless you want some issues occurring. Like anything, there is certain levels. Excess ain't going to give you any more benefits. It will be deleterious to your body. And if you listen to some crackpot who gave you some stupid advice, stop immediately subscribing to them. Wait if past the flu were with trade in summer. Why does the vitamin D of the summer don't protect them? Remember, back in those days, a lot of these viruses were new, and they would come and go in different times. The reason why we get viruses now all year round is because we've got air travel. People move between different parts of the world constantly. Back then, it was just trade, and it could have taken like a number of years for a certain strain to leave, let's say, China through the Silk Road. By the time it got to Europe, it had mutated and changed multiple times. So even if you had got something way earlier, a different strain, and then you got it, some people got it, it would have changed so much after 10, 20 years that it came back again, that it would be completely so different by that stage that it would be like a new virus. Each time we get something, because it's just a slight variation, what happens is our bodies are able to go, okay, I know this, and I can mount this is what worked last time. Let's try something similar. And if it, then we could sort of can ramp up the sort of thing. But back then, because you were getting it occasionally every 10, 20, maybe 50 years, and it was quite different by the time it came back through the Silk Road and these sort of pathways, because of the time lags that we don't have today, because our movements around are much more rapid. There are people that are moving between different continents within hours. So things are moving around the globe at very high speed. And as a consequence, we're being exposed continuously. And so we are probably, because we're being exposed to so much, we're building up far greater, libraries of knowledge, our immune system, on all these things. Where isolated populations like in the Americas, they had no hope. They were just wiped out, large parts of their populations. It was only the ones on species appropriate diet, like on buffalo and stuff like that. They also had deaths in the younger ages because of developing immune systems, and in the older ages because of frailty and stuff like that. But the people in the middle had some people die, but not everyone. Much lower sort of death rate in that middle sort of age type group. And that's why they survived far better than the agriculturalists on the coast in the southern states of America, where there was more of the agriculturalist type, and in Central America and in the Amazon basin. Their whole civilizations collapsed like, anywhere between 70 to 90%. So there is a difference in that regard. So our immune systems, we're the beneficiaries of countless and countless of generations that were wiped out in vast numbers. So we've incorporated all that treasure in the so-called junk DNA that we call it, in that sort of stuff, the stuff that doesn't produce proteins. In that stuff, we've incorporated shitloads of data on these things, which means that we have tools to deal with it far better than they had. That's where the difference lies. And also, a lot of them also were undernourished. Being undernourished as well, peasants and stuff like that, makes you more also vulnerable, because you've got a weaker immune system. Remember, you need amino acids sufficient amino acids, in particular glutamate, in order to produce immune cells. So there's all that to factor in. So it's a bit more nuanced, but you have to take that into consideration in that regard, where we get mostly exposed in the winter because of travel, and that's when our vitamin D levels tend to be the lowest. And in summer they go up. We've already had some exposure, so even if another strain comes along, it doesn't really, we're a bit more robust because we've already got some information on it. These are the sort of differences. And remember, most of these things will travel from one continent to another, and that's why it gets around quite a bit. And so let's say our immune systems get a lot of training on a yearly basis, because there are aircraft coming in, there are boats, tourist boats, all sorts of vessels coming in from all over the world. So very different to those isolated communities that had like seasonal trade, and also the distances were vast and took a long time for things to sort of move through those populations to other locations. So there were those factors as well. Harry, do you think the misinformation on the proper human diet spread by most of the just because of the trained or the bad data or the international curation? It's possibly all of those, but fundamentally it's the mighty dollar. From oils and as Weston A. Price said when he looked at populations that were either eating their traditional diet or populations that were eating the processed food, oils and flour, which is refined carbs, those populations were less healthy. So it's not now, it's been for a long time. And there's more profit in those type of foods. Refined carbs, refined oils, there's more profit, bigger profit margin compared to animal foods, and also even some of the organic plants as well, which even in small things can have some hormesis, some sort of effects that can be, like medicinal stuff. So it's not all, let's not go crazy. Yes, plants are not species required, but they do have some pharmacological effects in small amounts in that regard. And we've had now over 100 years in particular, but it was even earlier than that, even in the previous century when you had the Banting diet and all that sort of stuff. There's been, let me just rotate a bit back. Most people know about the Seventh-day Adventists. They're a religious group who believe in something which is more plant-based. And they've promoted this, and they believe that it's divine, that they need to promote this sort of way, which is wrong, because, why were all those sheep being slaughtered in the temple in Jerusalem? Okay, and then eaten, if that's a bad food. So, anyway, so it makes no sense in that regard. Early Christianity had no issue with animal foods, and neither did the Jewish faith, and neither do most other faiths. There are some funny sects in the subcontinent and a few other places in the world, but there isn't in any sect or group that's come out of Christianity that has this sort of belief system. But these people have. There were people like Kellogg's, who, the Kellogg's brand and all that, and he promoted that because he believed a low-fat diet reduced your testosterone levels, reduced the hormones that make you more horny and more, manly or whatever. And so that if you ate animal foods, you'd become more of a sex crazed individual. So we have to suppress this. And so he sort of collaborated with the Seventh-day Adventists and promoted a lot of this sort of stuff. And so there was a lot of money from these individuals that were able to permeate through. In particular, it wasn't so much in Europe, it was in the American academia, the American establishment, and the American government. Where in Europe, it was areas that were influenced, because the Seventh-day Adventists are all over the world and they have networks. Even in Australia, Sanitarium is owned by them, which is another company that produces Wheat Bix and many of these sort of products, refined carbohydrate products. And so you have this promotion on a worldwide scale, in particular the Western world, but even in some parts of Asia now and parts of Africa now as well, smaller but they are influencing and financing a lot of the academia in these countries. And so they're pushing these narratives, the more plant-based. And so there's a lot of money behind this. And the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, because they could see a benefit, they jumped behind that bandwagon and funded it even further. And the rest is sort of history. And most people have just been told this dribble of misinformation through the media, which is also willing to help these groups out because they get advertising dollars from them. They don't care about the health of people. They don't even understand this stuff. They're not interested. They just go, these companies want to advertise and promote this sort of stuff. Fine. How much money are we getting for those ads? That amount? Great. That looks good on paper. It looks good for the shareholders. They're not into the nuancing like us. And so because the majority of people aren't in the nuancing, now some people within that establishment, within the food industry, pharmaceutical, and these religious groups know why they're pushing this. One for a religious and the other one sees a benefit for unifying with these people for the money side. And they push this sort of stuff. And they're quite vocal. And also they make sure that the administrators in the universities keep their academics in line. Their academics start basically saying, well, that's bullshit and, animal foods are good. You know what happens? The administrators are gonna basically cane them and say, you're costing us money because if we start promoting this sort of material, the companies are going to the food companies and the other, organizations aren't going to provide funding or, to us. And then we're going to have problems as a university to function. So all about money, not about the science and not about ethics or anything. It's just all about these people have vested interests. And it's, what do they say? There's an old saying that if your salary is dependent on it, you'll say anything and do anything. And I could see even in the COVID era, I could see many people because they had mortgages, their salary was dependent on that. They didn't want to talk to me. They avoided me like the plague because I was a leper in a sense, because what I was saying was unfashionable. And I was just trying to warn these people because I worked with them for years. I didn't want them to harm themselves, but I was persona non grata, I was like that, hated. So it was very difficult you're fighting against a massive machine. It's not easy. I mean, some of you guys have had similar experiences to me. I don't need to tell you guys. You've probably had similar experiences. It is really hard to fight against this Goliath that exists. Doesn't mean we shouldn't, but it's hard. And that's why we get small successes. People that we're able to unhook from that matrix and show them a very different world that exists. And some of them are not willing and actually will fight you. Not only are not willing, will fight you. You know relatives that will basically criticize you. You're healthier, you're off all your meds and all that, and they will fight tooth and nail to stay on their meds and eat their crap. So, and you go, and some of the, when it comes to general, they may be very reasonable, nice people. You touch their food or their drugs and they become really hostile. You've probably met a lot of people. It's only when people are at their wits' ends and it's not really working, they're starting to think and going, why am I still like this? Then they start, some investigate. Others may see some of their relatives are doing better and go, maybe I'll try something like that. It probably doesn't work. He's just got different genetics or he's lucky, something like that. And they'll try it. And then, and then they become true believers because they've tried it and they've actually seen better results. It's a bit like that. It's unfortunate that that is how we can unhook from that system. I had to go all the way to having a heart attack and nearly dying before I unhooked myself and started asking questions. So that's the problem. Why it's so difficult and why it's hard to fight that whole machine. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't. So yep. As I say, in winter, I tend to consume less salt. Sometimes I won't put any salt on my food. But in summer, I definitely need it. So it'll vary. And I listen to my body, and I don't listen to ideologies. I listen to my body, Joseph. So listen to your body. It'll tell you, things will taste less salty or more salty. And, I'm getting too much. Like, when we talk about blue light, we only talk about eye signaling, but there's an effect when it hits the skin, the melanopsin in the skin, yes, like infrared. Isn't something to be worried about. It damages DNA, Ross. No, not really. The key signaler for your sort of pituitary, that axis that actually is involved in the sort of night cycle of the circadian sort of clocks that you've got, that's through the eyes. That's why I'm wearing these glasses. And I've got the lights up there, the blue, it's on the amber. I know it's, yeah, it usually when my screens drop as well, I think it's 9 o'clock when that happens, it'll go really, and inside I have a red, near infrared light for night when I'm just, before I go to bed, my bedroom as well. So this one here and the one in the living area and the one in this room where I've got my office and storage area, this one has the day one, which is similar to the light source of the sun. It's not exactly, but it's similar. So the next one is in the afternoon, in the sort of that period between just before dawn, dusk comes in, or in the dawn period, is that second click, which has a bit more near infrared and those sort of signal. And then after, when it's just starting to get dark, I switch over to this one. And that's right through into the evening, and then 9:30 I sort of shut all this down and go into the living area where I've got the red, and which is full, it's just red, with the different frequencies of the near infrared and so on. And that's the sort of what I'm between 9 onwards that I'm sort of around. And then that's the same thing that I have in my bedroom. So I'm not affecting my melatonin levels. I'm not, and it really, I'm out in a couple of minutes once I lie down, which is good. And I am actually starting to yawn and feel sleepy after I'm in an hour in that sort of red light, and I'm wearing these glasses, and I notice I start yawning and becoming very sleepy. And so it doesn't take much to get me to sleep. But in the past, like many people, would struggle because you're basically in an environment with high levels and, high cortisol signaling that you would have in the daytime, those sort of levels, and very low melatonin levels. Very hard to sleep under those sort of circumstances. And I also I put sort of the cover over my eyes as well. I've got one of those. I've got two actually that I interchange. I wash one when I'm using the other. So that also protects my melatonin levels at night, because unfortunately I can't not there is a bit of light that can come through. It's very low grade, but I live in a city and there's lights around, and even distant lights you'll get a bit in. Maybe I probably need to at some stage upgrade my curtains to those blocking ones, but currently I haven't, and so I cover my eyes, and that seems to do it fine, and I get enough sleep and stuff like that. But in terms of, there are multiple circadian clocks, and obviously the skin is the other part, and that's why I have the lighting. So I've got this stuff to make sure the melatonin is fine, and then also to get all the other clocks into line with the evening as it progresses. So I think you should have both this and the lighting. It's not cheap. One of those light bulbs costs 30 odd bucks. So they're not cheap. So if you need to replace a lot of bulbs in a place, that can cost you a few $100. And if one goes out and you have to replace it, it's not like the cheap stuff, a couple of dollars, 30 bucks a pop. So it's not cheap in that regard. And I've already, in these ones I've had for now, this one I've had for about 2 years. The other one I only had it for about, 9 months or 10 months, I can't remember, and I failed, and so I had to replace it. So that light I couldn't use anymore because I didn't have a replacement. I hadn't bought a replacement. I thought they lasted longer, but they vary. You'll probably get about 2 to 3 years out of them, sometimes longer. I had one that seems to be going and going now. It's slightly over 3 years. So there could be a lot of different things. I noticed the ones that have got a single light, whether it's the amber one for the evenings or the red one for the night, the late, after 9, basically, that one tends to, they tend to be fine. The ones where they've got the 3, where you have to click the actual your light switch in order to transition from one to the other, they seem to be more susceptible in dying. So I had a couple of those, and now I'm down to 2. So I've had replaced all the others. I still do want in my office to have that because I work from home in the office, and I want to have that sort of circadian signaling through the day in the office. But whether in the living space, if this dies, I'll replace it with a living space, and I'll get one which is amber or red for that part of the house. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know why those ones which can transition to the 3 different settings, sort of circadian type lights as they call them. Yeah, I'm not really sure why they don't last as long. It could be because my power is the wiring is a bit old in this place. That could be the issue. It may not be the actual light bulbs. It may be that the wiring is a number of years older compared to my previous place. So yeah, I've been here for a number of years now. Well over was it now? 2000. Yeah, 19 years. So been a while. Previous place, which I'd rewired, and because that place was a dump, I had to gut it all and rewire it and put Cat 6 cabling through. Anyway, So that was, yeah, more modern. This is more older. So that may be a factor, possibly. So I'm just letting you know, just if you do go down that pathway, consider your wiring before you get the E3. I'm prepared to pay, even if they want to fail every 9 months. Fine. It's only $30 for me. It's not a terrible impost for my health in that regard. But in terms of, somebody who's got a very large place with a big family and all that, and trying to put a lot of that sort of stuff, it may be a bit prohibitive, especially if their wiring is a bit older. So just keep those things in mind. DJ Projectus, how are you, mate? Are plants really that bad? If one picks safer ones and prepares and consumes not so much, then the what was that? Activation is low. Can't it? How can I put it? A small amount of plants isn't going to be like a killer. But I would say that, is it necessary? No. Do I care whether you eat some plants? I'm not the carnivore police, so I'm not going to basically whack you over the head if you eat some plants. Okay, so that ain't going to happen. But all I can say is that it's not required for your body to function, okay, or to get the nutrients that it needs and all that. But in regards to certain compounds that are in plants and all that, they, are problematic. Whether it's a protease inhibitor that doesn't allow you to absorb sufficient protein from these plants. Now, certain plants can be problematic, like corn and stuff like that. People have shown quite clearly. You can eat oysters, which are very high in zinc. You combine that with a tortilla, and you practically get nothing. It gets all bound up, and you don't absorb it. So they're not without consequences. So to say that they're not bad, they have different thresholds. If anything's going to be safer of plants, it's probably going to be on the deuterium side. I would say it would be legumes. They have to be prepared to break down the anti-nutrients and all that. And on the other side, in terms of less anti-nutrients, it would have to be fruit. So that's sort of your sort of options in that regard. Pick and choose. I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to you what you use. I mean, if I go around in Christmas and Dad's bought some cherries, do I partake in some cherries? Yes, I do. But that's probably once a year, okay, to be sociable. But would I go and buy cherries? No. But would I buy something like strawberries and cream? Maybe. It's got very high levels of fisetin. So it's a cheap way of actually getting it. But again, the problem is they don't, unless you can get organic strawberries, it's a problem with the residue of they use a lot of chemicals on them. So it's, yeah, can be problematic with some of these things, depending on your sourcing and stuff like that. It's up to you what you want to do. You know, nothing to do with me, whether you want or not to do certain things. That's your issue in that regard. You Googling this stuff and asking me questions. Just a push on riboflavin. Carnivore does have more. Yeah, it does have more. Carnivore through beta oxidation uses more complex 2. Look, as I've said in previous videos, I've said that things like riboflavin, the requirement for somebody that doesn't have any genetic issues, like I have genetics for MTHFR, so I need slightly more as a cofactor. Others that don't have MTHFR or whatever, they're probably getting enough. And they're probably getting enough also of thiamine, because usually thiamine, the requirements is less through beta oxidation. So you only require half. Proteins and fats only require half the amount of thiamine that carbohydrates do, because they have to go through 2 enzymatic stages. So because they and that's why they require more. But so if somebody doesn't have a genetic reason, like I have with MTHFR, other people have with TMAO, with TMA to convert it to TMAO, and they can't, they smell like a fish. And some other people that have got rare genetic disorders, as I said earlier, for those people, some extra, either supplemental or through the food, extra riboflavin would be a good idea for those people. I'm not saying everybody. If you remember what I was saying before, I was being specific to rare genetic disorders and major genetic disorders where there is a requirement for one of these 3. But that's not for everyone. Okay? And excessive in people that have got normal, no genetics and all that, excessive can be a problem, in particular with niacin. You know, if you go too high with niacin, it can interfere with gluconeogenesis and certain other biological processes. So it's not a good idea, you know, because people have used it in the past to bring down LDL-C. But it also creates side effects. So it's problematic. And I found out that because I was going through that statin, niacin, cardiovascular issue back then, and that's how I had to do a deep dive and look into that. But if somebody's going to supplement niacin to get other benefits, I would say don't go over 300 milligrams. That's definitely don't go up to the 2-3 grams or 1 gram that some other people out there say you should. That's just way beyond, you know, the levels that people should be even touching, because you're going to get a lot of side effects. More isn't better. Oh, DJ Projectus, I'm around 80% carnivore. Good for you. But if I want to go to 90 or 100%, I get the sensation of not having, air to breathe, and my airways and my mouth are dry. But the oximeter shows I have enough oxygen in my blood. Okay. Interesting. That sort of indicates to me some sort of requirement. There's something what sort of plants can you put in what sort of plants are you actually consuming? So what are you getting from that other 20% or whatever that are actually because that may give me an idea. Because that would probably give me a bit of an insight into sort of stuff and stuff like that, because that ain't normal. Let's put it that way. There are plenty of people that are doing 100%, and tribal people and many others that will do very high in certain seasonal periods when there's no vegetation around. They don't have any of these problems. So it's either a genetic or some other issue that, exposure to something, and maybe the plant compound is helping with detox. So, yeah, if you don't have time now, potatoes and fruits. Okay. So that's your extra stuff. There's not going to be much in. There's not going to be much in. I can't think of any compound in fruit that would have any benefit in improving the sort of your air, or that, because you actually said you've actually checked your oxygenation, and that's not the problem. You've got a dry mouth, and you've got like the sensation of breathing difficulty. Sounds very bizarre. I've never heard of anything like that. It's intriguing. I'll look into it. Leave me a comment to remind me, and I'll look into it, because I've never heard of anybody having something like what you're describing. I know that people that have got, because I can't see any compound in potatoes or fruit that could actually, if you had something like some sort of toxin, but then you would actually get a reduction, like mold or whatever. You get a reduction, you have an effect on the actual oxygenation. It would be minor, but there'd be some other thing. Interesting. I don't have an answer for you at all. It seems very strange why you would get that sort of sensation. What's in fruit or potatoes that would actually counteract that effect? So, yeah, strange. Absolutely strange. But interesting. I get intrigued by these sort of things. It's like the sort of rare diseases that I go into and try and find solutions for people. I get really caught up in these sort of things. It's, God, I've never heard of that. I need to find out. So, yeah, I have the same problem when in other fields like physics or whatever, something new comes up and I'm going, I need to find that. Obviously, sometimes some idiotic ideas come up. And when you look into the observation of the experiments, doesn't really support what they're arguing for in most cases, which is annoying. Okay, so learning's basically saying that he could be the added fats. I got huge thirst and issues breathing when I increased my fats, especially liquid fats. So are you in the same sort of boat, DJ Prue? Are you like doing really very high? I usually do, me personally, my fat is sort of 1 gram for 1 gram of protein. So it's usually in that sort of ratio that I have. So I don't have really high fat numbers or really high protein numbers. I have medium, moderate of both in sort of your 60 whatever percent, and the other thing. Oh, there you go. So that excess, it's a bit like the, who was asking me about the 400 chili or whatever his name was, who was telling about the protein, and that was, that excessive amount, you're getting beyond the physiological capacity at that. Maybe, and that's your body going, too much, stop, too much protein or too much fat, just stop, I can't handle this amount. So it's not that you need the fruit or the potatoes, but when you eat the fruit or the potatoes, what happens is you're going to eat less fat because they are filling, and you're going, oh, I can't fit any more fat, it's too hard. And that's what you're getting. But you could potentially be causing the Randall cycle as well if you're going to put in potatoes. So I wouldn't advise that. Long term, it's not going to be healthy. Just cut back on the fat. I think me and Bart have said to people constantly, 1-to-1, stop chasing ketones like all the other idiots in the low carb community. That's not the purpose of the diet. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. Stick to that and you're going to have less problems. I think we've possibly resolved that. G'day. Yes. Thank you for that. I know who you are. We'll have a chat next week when I see you. Pushback with calcium. More pushbacks? Why on carb-centric diets my blood sugar was good without getting calcium? Mainly ate potatoes. That's because of the insulin. It's all it is, the insulin. You're holding on to more on sodium, and what happens is when you hold on with more insulin, you hold on to more sodium. You also, because remember, these electrolytes have to be balanced. So intracellular, you have more magnesium, potassium, where in the actual bloodstream you have more calcium and more sodium. When you basically eat more carbs, you slightly raise your insulin, you hold on to more. When you're in a more low carb state, you have less insulin. If you're not eating enough protein, you end up basically dumping, and when you dump that, you'll dump calcium as well. So you have to eat a bit more protein. I usually say about 2 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight, of ideal body weight. That's what you should be focusing on. And if you have genetics, which you require more calcium, you'll know. And you consume a bit more calcium and it fixes it in that regard. So it's a different physiological state because there's lower insulin to hold on to the electrolytes. So the way the physiology of a person on a carnivore diet holds on to electrolytes is by not drinking much water. Because when you drink water, you're producing a far more metabolic water. Let me explain to you what's happening. Probably should make a video on this. Okay. When you consume carbohydrates, you produce 0.44. For every gram, you produce 0.44 grams of metabolic water, less water. That is why you feel thirsty and you drink more water. But the elevated insulin holds on to the electrolytes as well and draws that water. That's that part. On high-fat diet, low carbohydrate, it's the complete opposite. You're actually, for every gram of fat, you're producing 1.8 1 grams of metabolic water. See the difference? Substantially different. What is it? I've never done the percentage. I should do the percentages divided by. That's about 2.5-fold, 2.5 times more water. See the difference? So your water requirements go all the way down. That's why you don't see any Maasai, Hadza, or any of these tribal people carrying water bottles around with them, because they produce sufficient metabolic water. What I was talking about earlier about the fasting, how fasting helps with that. If you fast and get yourself the ketones up, you're going to create more metabolic water, and then going to a dry fast, it's going to be much easier. Well, it's the same thing. If you're living a tribal society in Africa and you're basically consuming more animal-based products, what you're going to do is you're going to be producing more metabolic water internally. That's why you're not thirsty. These people go out into arid environments and they produce all the water they need internally from the fat. There's your difference. But if you start eating carbs, even a small amount, what happens is immediately you suppress hormone-sensitive lipase. With that hormone-sensitive lipase, you can't release more free fatty acids into the bloodstream in order to increase the amount of metabolic water. There's your problem. And what is the biggest mistake people do in a low-carb diet? They consume a lot of water. That's their problem. They consume far too much water. And by consuming more water, what are they doing? They're forcing their electrolytes out. And because they're in a much lower insulin state, it's much easier to do that. Because where the water goes, when you pee it out, so do the electrolytes. There's your issue. That's why having practically zero water, if you can avoid it. I have it primarily for coffee. Very little water, and you produce more of it yourself internally. You will be able to maintain better homeostasis if you're specifically eating enough protein to get that insulin bump once or twice a day to basically signal to the kidneys to hold on to those electrolytes. That's what's happening. You've got a different physiological state. What are the benefits? The benefits of basically having this homeostasis means you're not basically, you're going to have better blood pressure regulation, heart rate, and everything else. When you put insulin in, it actually draws more water, draws more sodium. This is why on the low sugar diet, if you go all the way back to Walter Kempner that did the rice diet in the 1930s, he recommended only one supplement, iron, no other electrolyte, because he knew that his diet would affect insulin, and that higher insulin would hold on to the electrolytes, and that you did not need. That's why on low-fat diets, because of the insulin effect, you don't really need a lot of these things. They're held on because of the insulin, the higher insulin that you're running. That's how they get away with it. But on a low-carb diet, what happens? You need to have lower insulin in order to access body fat as well, because hormone-sensitive lipase doesn't like when insulin is elevated. There's your different physiology, why the requirements are what they are. It's nuanced, but that's exactly what's happening in the body and all that. And your water requirements, exogenous, that means externally, go down markedly as well. Hadza seasonally, and if you actually look at the periods that they actually will get from leaves, because they don't trust water, which is contaminated in rivers and stuff like that, they get it from leaves, which they put into ostrich eggs. And they only do that, and so do the sand people of the Kalahari. They only do that at times when, and it's usually seasons when there's fruit around and stuff like that. Guess what that's doing? Slightly elevating above the level, because when you eat a lot of animal protein together with sugar, it amplifies the level of insulin even higher. That immediately cuts out hormone sensitive lipase, which means cuts out metabolic water production. Immediately you become more thirsty. It happens to the tribal people as well, seasonally, because they actually said it to Mary Ruddock when I spoke to her. Forgot about that, just remembered. So it's all these adjustments. The body's in a dynamic flux and change depending on the inputs. You put these inputs in, these things alter in this way. You hold on more to these things or release more of them, depending on what you're doing. So there's all that nuancing you need to take into consideration. That is why, and that's why Walter did not allow his patients to take any electrolytes, because he didn't want to draw more water and increase blood pressure, because he knew it would. And that's what happens to sad dieters who consume processed foods, carbohydrates and all. They raise insulin, and they've got all these foods because they put salt in them to make them more palatable for people to be more hungry, to eat more. And what happens is you get high sodium retaining, holding onto more water, insulin holding onto more water as well, and all that, increasing that, you get waterlogged. And people have these fat legs with a whole lot of waterlogging and all that sort of stuff from that. This is well known back in the 1930s. This is not new science. It's just most modern doctors and academics nowadays have no idea of that research. There's a problem in our world. So much ignorance and misunderstanding of how these things work and interplay. When you put this input, this happens. Put that input, that happens. Stop seeing the world in reductionist ways. Understand that it's a system, the physiology. When you pull this lever, it affects a whole lot of other things in the body. When you understand it like that, you know exactly what's happening, as I've explained it to you in the most simplistic terms, without baffling you with a whole lot of pathways, or Googling a whole lot of pathways like you did in that regard, because that is not explaining physiology. It's just complicating things. I keep it simple. I know the pathways, but I keep it simple. I don't need to elaborate the 10 enzymatic pathways through, glycolysis that removes all the deuterium ions and reduces the amount down to that smaller amount. That's why you get less hydrogen ions in there, and they produce less metabolic water when they get combined with oxygen. There's your issue, because once they get stripped, they go through the electron chain, they go through the ATPase and come down, then they actually then not only produce ATP, the currency energy, they release some Gibbs free energy, and they also produce metabolic water. But I'm not going to complicate it to that level, because I'm just trying to explain in general terms that most laymen can understand. But that's what's really happening. So your calcium requirements on a carb-centric are different than on a low-carb diet. And that's why you feel like you need less when you take potatoes. But the downside is you're also increasing the Randall cycle. And so that also increases inflammation. Do that long term over decades and decades, there are going to be consequences. So that's how you have to consider all these things. And you may not have, like some centenarians that have they run much lower blood sugar levels. Why? Because they've got high clearance, much higher clearance than other people. And also, a lot of them also have certain ApoE phenotypes or genetics. Let me use basic sort of stuff, the genetics for this type of enzyme. And because of that, their receptor sites on on their liver, there's less of them to take in chylomicrons. So you don't get a whole lot of sugar. You get less the construct of insulin resistance or the Randall cycle in the liver as a consequence. So those levels are going to be lower, and it's giving enough time for the liver to deal with the sugar. So that is why the blood sugar will lower faster in those people with those genetics, which we call longevity genetics, than in other people. But you can get the same effect on a low carb diet, keeping that low grade blood sugar, because you don't have their genetics. So you have to do it dietary wise. Got it? Anyway, hope I'm clear, making some traction with some of you people in that regard. Oh. Oops. Thanks, mate. Appreciate the 200. I'm not sure what currency it is, but thanks anyway. Appreciate it. This is why a lot of people get caught out from sort of reductionist nonsense that people are peddling out there, for the simple reason that it's the way, you know, a lot of people are able to push these narrow things, and people can actually test it. They can go, oh, I did that and I had that effect. Oh, it must be work. But they don't have the full nuancing. They don't realize, yes, because you've raised insulin, you're holding on and you don't need as much. But what are the ramifications of that? Oh, higher inflammation long term. So what's that going to do? More glycation. So what's that going to do long term? So you're not weighing things or because you're unaware, but you've listened to somebody who's made a very strong argument and showed you this sort of stuff. And so look what's happening, but hasn't explained it properly, and you haven't looked at it properly, and you end up jumping on that bandwagon like a lot of people jump from the latest flavor of the month, and they follow one influencer and all that. I'm not an influencer. I had health problems. I had to fix them. I had to learn exactly how physiology works and all that. I'm not interested in selling you anything. I don't sell anything. I don't give a shit. You know, I'm interested in how to live longer and how to be healthier and how to fix problems. The rest of it is just propaganda and nonsense and noise, background noise. Now, if I was selling and I was an influencer and all that, I'd probably have 1 million subscribers and I'd be peddling all the shit that the new trends or whatever else out there, because that's how you make money on the webs. You know, people like Bart have had to do it more ethically by selling a specific supplement which they know has a benefit by creating more stem cells. So it's a biohack to produce new healthy cells in that regard. And that's what, you know, the sort of stuff that he peddles to pay the bills, so to speak. I have a day job, so I don't really care. Some people want to say thank you for the work that I do and provide me for a coffee or whatever. Thank you. I basically thank the person for that and leave it at that. But the reality is that, you know, a lot of these sort of things we have to understand that if you don't get the nuancing, you miss the whole picture in that regard. So, you know, there are a lot of people out there that will consume more meat and more sugar. They'll get rid of the fat. They'll go lean meat and all that. And while they're not getting the levels of like massively high insulin like you would get on a fast food diet, you're still getting much higher than even on a low fat diet, which is an insulin to glucagon of 4-to-1, low carb, ketogenic, carnivore, anywhere between 1.3 to 1.5. See the difference? Yes, it's slightly high insulin, but it's not very high up. So you can access, and even at 4-to-1, you can access, there's still some hormone sensitive lipase in the system. So even on a low fat diet, you can access some body fat in between meals and oxidize fat and switch back and forward and stuff like that, depending on how you eat. Now, if you go too low, then you'll become ravenous, as you see many long-term vegans becoming ravenous. They're just stuffing their mouth because they don't have a lot of body fat, and the only way to prevent muscle and bone loss is to basically stuff themselves like mad. It's the reason why Walter Kempner only recommended his diet for therapeutic purposes, to correct a specific kidney disease for 1 year, not for long term, because he knew that it would be very deficient in many other respects. He sort of stumbled on the Randall cycle, but in the opposite way, with a low fat rather than a low carb approach. Had he known about the work being done on ketogenic diets and stuff like that, the Banting diet, he'd come out of Germany as a fleeing immigrant from there, from the Nazi regime. He was Jewish. And so Walter Kempner didn't really know what was happening in America, what the Johns Hopkins University was doing on ketogenic diets and other things. And they were having similar results with epilepsy, but also some other conditions. So he was unaware of that. Back then, the different schools there wasn't a lot of communications. You had to go to libraries to get copies that had been published years ago. And then at some point, the librarian was able to purchase these things and make them available to the academics. So there was no internet, there was none of this sort of stuff to know about these sort of things. It was sort of word of mouth, or a visiting academic from one university to another, which would tell those people, oh, look what I found or discovered, or this is some of the research that I'm doing. It was a very different world back then. So there's all those sort of factors in that regard. Eat more fat. So just eat more fat, because that's just too much. You should add, as I said, max 4 grams per kilo body weight at max. That's just, and you probably don't even need that. So 4 would be 272. So 270 is about 4. So I wouldn't recommend that high. And I'd just say eat a bit more fat, because maybe you don't have enough fat, and you haven't allowed yourself to become fat adapted, because sometimes people are too skinny, so not eating enough fat. They want more to produce gluconeogenic glucose. So you may be one of those people. I've heard a number of people where they've raised they're really leaned out, and they've ended up raising their blood sugar level as well, as a consequence of just using a lot of the proteins for producing sugar. And that's why you're ravenously hungry. You're probably not getting enough fat. Most people, the biggest problem is most people don't eat enough fat. That's the problem with a lot of people. They tend to eat more protein than fat, and that's where they get into trouble. A lot of the meats that we buy are very lean. They cut a lot of the stuff off. It's not what a tribal person would eat. They would be eating a lot more, and they'd even be eating the brains. They'd be eating shitloads of cholesterol. The Hadza, one of their favorite meals is baboon brains. They love it, So if you're on a low carb diet, you need far more fat, especially if you're lean, like the Hadza and the Maasai. So you're basically compensating for the lack of fat by eating more protein and getting yourself into trouble. Yep, truth about corporate world. Yep, definitely. Oh, is that the time? 9 o'clock. Bloody hell. Okay. We'll have to. Good evening. G'day. G'day, nutrition. So, g'day, mate. So what do you think about garlic as a natural detox antioxidant? It provides certain salts can be used in part of the detox pathways. That's pretty much it. Your liver does all the detoxing, and kidneys excrete things, so do your lungs, in that regard. But the majority of the stuff is bile and the liver system, and your phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 1 requires a number of B vitamins. Phase 2 requires more amino acids. And so, croaky voice. And so if you want to use it, I don't have a problem. That's dad produces his own organic garlic at home. I have used a bit in my cooking, so I don't have a problem. But I don't anymore. I really can't be bothered. He's offered it, and I go, no, don't worry, Dad. I don't need it. But if you enjoy it, yeah, not a problem. But it's at the end of the day, it's providing a bit of sulfur, protein. Sulfur amino acids in protein provide sufficient for detox purposes. Excessive amounts of plants do have other compounds. They can have some negatives as well. Garlic and onions, if you can tolerate them, are probably not that bad, but not necessary either. There's plenty of tribal populations that have never eaten garlic or onions in their life. So, populations that would eat less meat and would be sulfur depleted or sulfur deficient, obviously garlic and onions would have been a very good source of sulfur for them, that were eating more plants in that regard. So, for people that are eating that sort of, they should be trying to get more sulfurs from these sulfur-rich foods, because it's a very important for a whole lot of biological processes in the body. But we get more than enough from the proteins that the animal foods that we eat have got plenty of those sort of things. Anyway, I'm gonna just go through anybody, because I'm gonna pull the plug shortly. Just if I haven't answered your question, just add it in the comment fields, and when I get a chance, when I come back from the markets tomorrow, when I get a chance, I'll basically it's beneficial for society. Do it, Bob. G'day, Sarah. And g'day, Lotto. Am I going to be lucky tonight? Just joking. And Paul. The more water you drink, the more thirsty you'll become. You need to bring insulin down. You need to be able to produce more metabolic water. When you can do that shift, you'll basically feel completely different. That's why I can do a dry fast without any problem and still work. Others would struggle. I don't, because I'm producing so many ketones, which means that's happening because I'm producing shitloads of water, metabolic water, and I feel like really switched on. It's like the lights are completely turned on. So, as I said, I'm not recommending it to anyone. It should be done under supervision. You should know how to prepare and all that sort of stuff. The reason why I don't recommend those sort of things to anyone, and I don't explain how to do it, is because I don't want to take responsibility for other people if they make mistakes or they're not fat adapted sufficiently or a whole lot of other things, and it creates complications for them. It's a risk that I'm not prepared to take. That's why I don't even go into that area. What I do, it's my business, but I know what I'm doing and I prepare properly for it and all that sort of stuff. Anyway. Yeah, Blake, good to see you here. And who else have I missed? Anyone else? I think that's about it. We're all the way down to Raymond. Yes, thank you as well for all of you from being here and participating, because without your questions, this live stream is me sitting here playing with my fingers. So thank you very much for supporting this channel. Thank you very much for turning up and asking me all these questions, keeping me on my toes. And yes, it's important to go through all these sort of things. Yeah, look, it has some antimicrobial effects and all that. But there are other ways of actually, on a species appropriate diet, where you have a better functioning microbiome as well. So it's a more complex, nuanced picture in that regard. Remember to put a like, yes, on this video before leaving, everyone. Yes, hit the like button. Yes, before you go, hit the like button, everyone. Thanks for reminding everyone, Scotty. Thanks, mate. Thank you as well. I missed you earlier. Anyway, or did you not put a question? So I didn't see ZN. Thanks, mate. Oops. Thank you. I do intend. I've got one or two things that I have to do in that regard. Put a few things away. That luckily I don't have to do any laundry. I did it on Wednesday, so that was out of the way. While I was working from home, I did it through the lunchtime, so that was easy to do. Thanks, Richard. Take care as well. See you when I see you next time on a Zoom session. Anyway, guys, thanks. Good night. Take care. And if I haven't answered a question and you really want to see it, yep, same to you. See you next time. And if you really want to get an answer on that question, leave it in the comments. Even though sometimes I may take a couple of days, sometimes even longer, depending if something crazy happens in my life, I always come back and check the last couple of videos. So you will get an answer. I know sometimes once it took 3 months because I missed one. As I went back checking a couple of older videos, I found it and I go, oh, and I answered. So even up to 3 months sometimes, I do get back to a lot of things when I've got some free time. And that's, like everyone, we're busy, got a family life, responsibilities. It never ending. That bald man's even got more. He's put more on his plate than anyone else. Yes, whole farm. He's a farmer. God, from academia to farming. Oh, that was smart. I won't say any more on that. It's funny you mentioned Billy the Kid. I drove through Fort Summer yesterday where he was killed. Oh, there you go. Talk about coincidence. Yes, life is like that. Yes. What do they say? 7 points of separation. There must be some mathematical thing behind all this. I've been telling people that you have methods of reducing plaque, but I don't remember the details. Well, the key thing is you need to basically first bring the inflammation down to stop all this from progressing. And then it's a matter of, once we've stabilized the atheroma, usually it will take like probably a year. Now, there is a cheat. You can do it quicker. You take statins for 3 months. You take coenzyme Q10 or ubiquinol because it affects that pathway. You accept some of the consequences, the side effects of the statins for 3 months. But what it does is any soft plaque gets calcified and stabilized. Then you go, throw that garbage away. It did what I needed to use it in that regard. Now, low inflammatory diet, clean out the inflammation, then, so you can do it in 3 months rather than actually waiting for a whole year in a natural way. See the difference? Or 2, you can accelerate the process. And then you're using things like proteolytic enzymes and stuff like that. Things like nattokinase. I don't use nattokinase, I use lumbrokinase. And the reason for that is it causes less problems on the endothelium, like, blood vessels bleeding and causing more complications. It works slightly different. It has more benefits. It reduces clotting factors. It reduces all this, but also it helps clean up a lot of this sort of stuff. As the healing happens on the endothelium, you want to basically 2 things you want to get rid. You want to clear that up. And so you do 3 months, you throw away the statins, then you do about another 3 months of really clean diet to bring down inflammation. You go and check and make sure there is no, like C-reactive protein and all these are down, low. Once you know that you're in a low inflammatory state, now we need to clear out the stuff. And we use metaquinone 4 to, to take the calcium and put it in the bones, so to speak. Make sure I'm also looking at thinning out the blood with like Rosetto cod liver oil, which is one of those really good quality ones from Norway. And that will help with the fat soluble vitamins like A, especially if some people are from those northern sort of areas where they've got poorer conversion, or just eat more eggs is another easy way. Just eat more eggs, as long as they don't have an egg sensitivity. That's another thing. Never ends with these sort of things, variations. So those are the sort of things you want to look at. And so one will eat away all the garbage and reduce the clotting factors, and the other will take that calcium and prevent it from going into soft tissue. But with vitamin D, retinol, and vitamin K2, you will have the right enzymes being activated to clear out that calcium and put it in the right places, the teeth and the bones where you want it. And so that gets better regulated, calcium regulation. The diet has those things, but we're trying to accelerate the so to speak, in that regard. And that's sort of the techniques that I used to basically take away all this crap inside. And I used taurine. I had to, because it also reduces, it helps with the endothelium healing and all that, but it also increases nitric oxide, just like citrulline. Not to the level that citrulline does, but also has another benefit, preventing the heart from remodeling and functioning properly, like when it reducing. The key thing that I use it for is to reduce any fibrosis. So in the endothelium and any fibrosis in the heart and many other organs, it actually reduces fibrosis. So in the liver as well, if you've got too much alcohol, so it can help in that. But I would most likely probably recommend also more TUDCA for the liver. But for specifically, that would help as well with all that cleanup and improving the functioning of those sort of things. And it could take, depending on how much damage, it can take anywhere from a couple of years, like 3 years, all the way to a decade. So it depends on the damage, and the level of plaque. It can be very low for some, which will clear out in 2 or 3 years. In others, quite substantial progression. It will take a decade. It's all that turnover. Our metabolism is much slower than rats, which can do things much faster, as the studies show. We can't. We're slower. It just is what it is. In that regard. Oh, I don't think he's the real Alan Joe. But thanks. Awesome to have 2 lives in a day. So from hearing about grey hairs before, I'm 40 and my dad 68 and only just starting to get greys. Yeah, look, it's unavoidable for most of us, a lot of these sort of things. But it depends on, like these things slow down for me, where my sisters in their 30s, mid-30s, they went completely white, grey, white, like the photo bleaching effect on them was much more substantial. My mother had the same problem. And on my auntie's side, mum's side, where the majority of these genetics come from, it's quite severe. My 2 cousins in their mid-30s, both of them, one's a doctor and one's a chemist. They both had this photo bleaching effect severe. For me, it was not as pronounced. And as I said, I was avoiding the sun and all that, and I kept it at bay for a long time until I just got sick and tired of it. I gave up. At some point you go, oh, I'm 59, or back then I was about 57. I just said, oh, but I'm giving up. I've had enough trying to stay, because I know that there's a lot of benefits from the circadian side, being out in the sun. All those frequencies are really helping the better functioning of it. Now you can say, well, your hair's losing pigmentation. Doesn't that annoy you? No, not really. I mean, when you get to my age, I don't care anymore in that regard. Supposedly some women at work have said, you look so distinguished, Harry. I go, oh, thank you for the compliment. That probably helped a bit the ego, I can tell you, and the vanity. Anyway, thanks, guys. Take care, and chat with you next time. See yous.